A ruthless billionaire laughs when he finds his wife's farewell letter, but his laughter dies when he sees what she left beside it, a positive pregnancy test. Before we begin this touching story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more moving stories. What do you mean she just walked out? Marcus Sterling's voice cut through the air-conditioned silence of his corner office, 52 stories above Boston's financial district. His executive assistant, Patricia Walsh, stood her ground despite his thunderous tone. After 15 years, she was immune to his outbursts. Mrs. Sterling came in around 9, left an envelope on your desk, and departed. She declined security's offer to call your car. Marcus's laugh was sharp and brittle. Another one of her dramatic gestures, I suppose? He dismissed Patricia with a wave, turning to face the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased his empire. The Sterling Industries logo crowned 3 buildings visible from his vantage point. The envelope sat innocuously on his mahogany desk, next to the morning's acquisition reports and a cooling cup of coffee. Rachel's handwriting was as elegant as ever on the front, for Marcus. Beside it lay her wedding ring and, his brow furrowed, what appeared to be a plastic stick. He opened the letter with a golden letter opener, a gesture so practiced it was almost theatrical. The paper inside was heavy, expensive stationery. Of course it was. Rachel had always had impeccable taste. It was one of the reasons he'd married her. Marcus, by the time you read this I'll be gone. Don't bother trying to find me, we both know you won't leave your precious empire long enough to try. After 5 years of marriage, I finally accepted that Sterling Industries isn't just your priority, it's your only love. I used to dream that one day you'd look at me the way you look at your stock prices. That you'd come home before midnight, that we'd have dinner conversations about something other than mergers and acquisitions. I was naive. But now there's someone else to consider. Marcus's eyes darted to the plastic stick. A pregnancy test. 2 pink lines stared back at him with accusatory clarity. His laughter started low, then built to a crescendo that would have alarmed anyone who heard it. Well played, Rachel, he said to the empty office. Quite the exit strategy. But his hands shook as he continued reading. I won't raise our child in the emotional wasteland of your world. I won't watch another Sterling grow up thinking love is a weakness and emotions are flaws to be corrected. Your father did enough damage with you. The mention of his father sent Marcus back 30 years, to a 12-year-old boy standing in a wood-paneled study, tears streaming down his face. Sterlings don't cry, his father had said. Tears are for the weak. And we are not weak. His phone buzzed. The board was waiting in the conference room. The Morrison deal needed his signature. 300 jobs hung in the balance. His empire needed him. I know you're probably already thinking about your next meeting, calculating the PR implications, planning damage control. That's who you are. That's who you chose to be. But I choose something different for our child. The ring is yours. The love it was supposed to represent never existed anyway. Goodbye, Rachel. The intercom crackled. Mr. Sterling? The board is asking. Tell them to wait. His voice was hoarse. Sir? The Morrison deal? I said wait. The words exploded from him with unexpected force. In the silence that followed, he could hear his heart pounding. Marcus Sterling had built his empire by knowing the value of everything. He could calculate profit margins in his sleep, predict market trends with uncanny accuracy, and reduce the most complex business problems to simple equations of risk and reward. But as he stood in his pristine office, holding his wife's farewell letter in one hand and proof of his impending fatherhood in the other, for the first time in his adult life, he had no idea what anything was worth. His laughter had died, leaving behind a silence that felt like a void. He picked up Rachel's ring, so small and light in his palm. How had something so weightless anchored his entire world? The board could wait. The Morrison deal could wait. His empire, for the first time in his life, could wait. Because Rachel was wrong about one thing. He would look for her. He would find her. And he would show her. He stopped, realizing he had no idea what he wanted to show her, or prove to her, or say to her. The great Marcus Sterling, who always had an answer, who always knew his next move, was lost. In the gathering dusk of his office, he stood alone, holding the scattered pieces of a life he'd never valued until it slipped through his fingers. Rachel Sullivan, she'd already stopped using Sterling, pressed her forehead against the bus window, watching as Pine Valley emerged from the Montana wilderness like a painting come to life. Morning sunlight caught the frost on the pines, making the world sparkle. Her hand drifted to her still flat stomach. 6 weeks, according to the test she'd left behind in Boston like a time bomb. Last stop, Pine Valley, the driver called out, his voice warm with the familiar drawl she remembered from childhood summers spent here. The bus wheezed to a stop in front of Martinez's family diner, its neon sign glowing cheerfully against the dawn. Rachel's heart clenched at the sight. 15 years ago, she and Sarah Martinez had sworn they'd run away to New York together, become famous artists, live extraordinary lives. Now here she was, running in the opposite direction. The diner's bell chimed as she pushed open the door, her designer boots, totally impractical for Montana, clicking against the worn linoleum. The aroma of coffee and fresh-baked cinnamon rolls wrapped around her like a hug. "Be right with you," called a voice from the kitchen, so familiar it brought tears to Rachel's eyes. "Take your time," Rachel called back, her voice wavering. "I've only been waiting 15 years. There was a crash from the kitchen. Then Sarah Martinez burst through the swinging doors, her dark curls escaping from a messy bun, flour streaking her cheek. "Rachel? Rachel Sullivan? Oh my God." They collided in a hug that smelled of cinnamon and coffee and childhood memories. Rachel buried her face in her friend's shoulder, and for the first time since leaving Boston, she let herself cry. Hey, Sarah soothed, rubbing her back. "Whatever it is, we'll fix it. Come on, let's get some food in you. You're eating for two now, aren't you?" Rachel pulled back, startled. "How did you?" Sarah's smile was gentle. "You've got that same look my sister Maria had when she was expecting. Plus you're here. In Pine Valley. On a Tuesday morning. Either you're pregnant, or you've finally decided to pursue your dream of becoming a professional elk whisperer." A laugh bubbled up through Rachel's tears. This was what she'd missed in Boston's endless cocktail parties and charity galas. Real laughter, real connections, real friends. "The guest house is all yours," Sarah said, sliding a plate of cinnamon rolls across the counter. "Stay as long as you need. Though fair warning, it comes with a guard dog who thinks he's a lapdog and has no respect for personal space." "I left him," Rachel blurted out. "Marcus. I left the letter this morning. And a pregnancy test." "God, Sarah, what have I done?" "You've come home," Sarah said simply. "Now eat your breakfast. Dr. Chen's office opens at 9, and I've already called to get you in for an ultrasound." Rachel stared at her friend. "You haven't changed a bit, have you? Still taking care of everyone?" "Someone has to." Sarah's eyes crinkled. "Pine Valley's got a way of collecting strays and broken hearts. We patch them up, dust them off, help them find their way again." Through the diner's window, Rachel watched as Pine Valley came to life. Mr. Wheeler unlocked the hardware store across the street, waving to everyone who passed. The local kids trudged to school, their backpacks bouncing. A group of old-timers claimed their usual table by the window, arguing good-naturedly about local politics. It was everything Boston wasn't. Everything her life with Marcus wasn't. Later, lying on the examination table at the clinic, Rachel held her breath as Dr. Chen moved the ultrasound wand across her belly. The screen flickered and then, "There's your baby," Dr. Chen said softly. "See that flicker? That's the heartbeat." Rachel stared at the tiny flutter of life on the screen, no bigger than a grain of rice. In Boston, this moment would have been scheduled months in advance, coordinated with Marcus's calendar, probably attended by his personal physician. Here, in a small-town clinic with Sarah holding her hand, it felt real. Right. "Strong heartbeat," Dr. Chin noted. "You've got a fighter there." Rachel thought of the strength it had taken to walk away from her marriage, from the gilded cage of her Boston life. "Yeah," she whispered, touching the screen gently. "We both are." As she and Sarah walked back to the diner, the Montana sky stretched endlessly above them, so different from Boston's crowded horizon of steel and glass. A pickup truck rumbled past, its driver tipping his hat. From the hardware store came the sound of laughter. "Welcome home, Rachel," Sarah said, squeezing her hand. "Welcome home." "What do you mean you can't find her?" Marcus's voice echoed through his private jet's cabin. Outside, Boston's lights faded into the night sky. "Sir," his head of security cleared his throat, "Mrs. Sterling's last credit card transaction was a bus ticket to Montana. After that, nothing. She must be using cash." Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose. 2 weeks of private investigators and data analytics had yielded nothing but a general direction. Montana. 800 miles of mountains and prairie, and somewhere in that vastness, his wife and unborn child. "The local contacts?" he pressed. "We've identified a small town called Pine Valley. Population 2,341. There's been unusual activity in their real estate market. Someone's been buying up properties, sir." Marcus smiled coldly. Rachel had always been clever with her tracks, but money left footprints. "Send me everything." The dossier appeared on his tablet. Pine Valley Hardware, owned by Jack Wheeler, third generation. Martinez Family Diner. The old Crawford building on Main Street. All recently approached by an anonymous buyer. Rachel, he murmured. She was setting up a new life, piece by piece. His smile widened. Tell the pilot to change course. We're landing in Helena. Jack Wheeler was arranging hammers when the bell above his door chimed. The man who entered wore a suit that cost more than Jack's monthly revenue. Mr. Wheeler. The stranger's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm Marcus Sterling. I believe you received an offer for your store recently. Jack's weathered face remained impassive. Received and declined, Mr. Sterling. Third generation this store. Not for sale. Everything's for sale. Marcus pulled out his phone. Shall we add a zero to that offer? You can add all the zeros you want, son. Answer still no. Marcus's facade cracked slightly. Mr. Wheeler, surely you understand? What I understand, Jack cut in, is that you're looking for someone. And throwing money around like it means something here. The store fell silent. Outside, a truck rumbled past, its driver waving through the window. She's here, isn't she? Marcus's voice was dangerous now. Rachel. My wife. Jack picked up a hammer, testing its weight. Lot of people come through Pine Valley, Mr. Sterling. Some running from something, some running to something. We don't much care which is which. They're all welcome long as they respect our ways. I could shut this store down with one phone call. Could you now? Jack's laugh was genuine. And I suppose you could shut down Sarah's diner too? Maybe buy up the whole town? As if on cue, the bell chimed again. Mrs. Chin from the pharmacy entered, then old Bill from the post office. Within minutes, the store was full of townspeople, browsing with exaggerated interest. Mighty fine hammer selection you got, Jack, Bill called out loudly. Shame if anything happened to this store. Whole town have to drive 40 miles for a decent tools? 40 miles in winter? Sarah Martinez appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. That'd be a real problem for the volunteer fire department. And the school maintenance crew. And Doc Chen's clinic repairs. Marcus looked around, realization dawning. Every face held the same quiet determination. These people weren't just customers. They were a community. His usual tactics of hostile takeovers and financial pressure wouldn't work here. I just want to talk to her, he said, his voice smaller than he'd intended. Then maybe, Sarah said, crossing her arms, you should try asking nicely instead of trying to buy people's lives out from under them. Marcus Sterling, who controlled billion-dollar corporations with a signature, who could make or break companies with a word, stood helpless in a small-town hardware store. His phone buzzed, another crisis in Boston demanding his attention. But for the first time in his career, the empire seemed distant, irrelevant. She's carrying my child, he said finally, his voice rough. No, Mr. Sterling, Sarah's eyes were kind but firm. She's carrying her child. And until you understand the difference, all the money in Boston won't help you find her. Marcus looked around one last time at the united front before him. These people had something his wealth couldn't touch, his power couldn't shake. They had each other. The bell chimed softly as he left, stepping into the bright Montana morning. Through the window, he watched the townspeople gather around Jack, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass. His hand tightened around his phone until his knuckles went white. For the first time since he'd taken over Sterling Industries, Marcus Sterling had lost. Not to a corporate rival or a hostile board, but to a handful of small-town shopkeepers who valued something more than money. The question was, what? Mark Stone? Jack Wheeler read from the application form, his eyebrows rising toward his hairline. The man before him had traded his designer suit for department store jeans and a flannel shirt that still had creases from the packaging. That's right, Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice neutral. He'd spent 3 days watching the store from his hotel room, studying the rhythms of Pine Valley life. Now, standing in Jack's cramped office, he felt like a child in a school play, desperately hoping no one would see through his costume. Experience? I ran a company in Boston. Hardware experience? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I'm a quick learner. Jack's weathered face gave nothing away. Start tomorrow. 6 a.m. sharp. We'll see how quick. 5:45 a.m. found Marcus, now Mark, staring at a mountain of boxed merchandise in the store's back room. Inventory needs to be checked, priced, and shelved, Jack announced, handing him a price gun. Remember? Customer service is our priority, Marcus finished. He'd memorized the employee handbook last night, along with basic hardware terminology. How hard could it be? By 8 a.m. he had his answer. Excuse me? An elderly woman waved from aisle 3. I need a thingamajig for my toilet. It's making a whooshing sound. Marcus blinked. A thingamajig? You know, the floaty thing. The float valve, he guessed, proud of his handbook studying. No, the other thing. In the tank? 15 minutes and 3 wrong parts later, Jack intervened. Mrs. Henderson, you need a flapper. Mark, get the ladder and help Mr. Peterson with those paint cans. The latter, as it turned out, was equally treacherous. Marcus, who had once negotiated a billion-dollar merger without breaking a sweat, found himself clinging to the top rung, wondering how his life had come to this. You okay up there, son? Mr. Peterson called. Fine, Marcus managed through gritted teeth. Just admiring the view. By noon, his hands were covered in paint, his back ached from lifting boxes, and he'd answered approximately 57 questions about products he couldn't identify. His Harvard MBA felt absolutely useless in the face of practical questions about pipe fittings and wood grades. Lunch break, Jack announced. Sarah's Diner does a mean meatloaf special. Marcus froze. I brought a sandwich. Jack's eyes twinkled. Suit yourself. Back room needs sweeping. The afternoon brought new challenges. A shipment of lumber needed sorting, customers needed assistance, and the ancient register system seemed deliberately designed to humiliate him. Each transaction was a small eternity of hunting for product codes while the line grew longer. Sorry for the wait, he mumbled to yet another customer. No rush, the man smiled. We're all on Montana time here. By closing time, Marcus's designer jeans were dust-covered, his carefully styled hair was a mess, and his hands, his manicured deal-signing hands, were covered in blisters. Well, Jack said as they locked up, you survived. Marcus stared at his raw palms. Barely. Know what I think? Jack's voice was casual as he counted out the register. I think Mark Stone isn't your real name. I think you've never worked a day of manual labor in your life. And I think you're here because you finally realized some things can't be bought. Marcus's heart stopped. Are you going to tell? Not my secret to tell. Jack pulled something from under the counter. Here. For your hands. My wife's recipe. Lavender and beeswax. Marcus stared at the small tin of salve. In Boston, he had a personal masseuse on call. Here he was, accepting homemade hand cream from a hardware store owner who had seen right through him. Why? He asked finally. Why help me? Jack's eyes were kind but shrewd. Because 20 years ago I was you. Well, not exactly you, didn't have the fancy suit or the millions. But I was running from something, thinking I could fix everything with force of will. Pine Valley taught me different. He gestured around the store. Every nail, every board, every tool in here has a purpose. But they're useless without the right hands to guide them. Same goes for people. All that power you've got? Useless without the right heart behind it? Marcus looked down at his blistered hands, really looked at them. He'd spent his life signing papers, pointing fingers, commanding from above. Today, for the first time, he built something. Fixed things. Helped people, even if he'd done it badly. Same time tomorrow? He asked quietly. Jack nodded. 6 a.m. sharp. And Mark? Yes. Bring some work gloves. Those soft Boston hands of yours aren't gonna last otherwise. As Marcus walked back to his hotel, the Montana sunset painted the sky in colors no Boston artist could capture. His hands throbbed, his muscles ached, and somewhere in this town, Rachel was carrying their child. But for the first time since she'd left, he felt something like hope. He had no idea how to be a father. But maybe, just maybe, he could learn how to be a better man. The morning sickness had finally subsided, leaving Rachel with an appetite that brought her to Martinez's Diner every morning before her art classes at Pine Valley Elementary. She sat in her usual booth, sketching the regulars while Sarah worked the counter. More tea, Doc Chin? Sarah called out to the petite woman in the corner booth. The town doctor smiled, pushing her cup forward. You'd think after 15 years you'd stop calling me Doc? And give up the chance to remind everyone our small town trapped a brilliant Johns Hopkins surgeon? Sarah winked. Never. Rachel's pencil stilled. Johns Hopkins? Dr. Chen's eyes met hers, understanding flickering there. 3 months away from making partner at their cardiac unit. Then one day, I realized I hadn't seen sunlight in a week, couldn't remember my last real conversation with a patient. She gestured around the diner. Now I treat everything from scraped knees to seasonal flu. Never looked back. Except when we need heart surgery, old Bill chuckled from the counter. Then we're mighty glad for those Hopkins skills. Rachel absorbed this information, adding subtle shading to her sketch. She'd assumed Dr. Chen was born here, like most of the townspeople seemed to be. Does everyone know your story? Hard to keep secrets in Pine Valley, Sarah said, sliding a fresh cinnamon roll onto Rachel's plate. Though some of us try. As if on cue, Jack Wheeler entered, the hardware store's morning deliveries completed. Morning all. Rachel, heard you're brightening up the elementary school walls. She smiled, thinking of her morning art classes. The kids' enthusiasm was infectious, their creativity unlimited by the rigid rules she'd learned in Boston's finest schools. They're teaching me more than I'm teaching them. Speaking of teaching, Sarah said, remember when Professor Harrison first showed up? Jack laughed. Rode in on that broken-down motorcycle, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Oxford University's youngest tenured professor, Sarah explained to Rachel. Pulled up one day, asked if anyone needed math tutoring. Now he runs the advanced placement program at the high school. Throughout the morning, Rachel heard more stories. The librarian who'd left a high-powered publishing career in Seattle. The mechanic who'd been a classical musician in Vancouver. Each story peeled back another layer of Pine Valley's seemingly simple surface, revealing depths she'd never imagined. We all came here running from something, Dr. Chen said softly as Rachel prepared to leave for her classes. But we stayed because we found something worth running toward. The school day passed in a blur of watercolors and children's laughter. Rachel's small art room overlooked Main Street, and she often found herself gazing out the window between classes, watching the town's rhythms. That's when she saw him. Marcus, her Marcus, was loading lumber into a truck outside Wheeler's Hardware. He wore jeans and a work shirt, his usually perfect hair tousled by the wind. As she watched, he paused to help an elderly woman with her purchases, carrying them to her car with careful attention. Rachel's hand instinctively went to her belly, now showing the slightest curve at 12 weeks. The man below looked like Marcus, moved like Marcus, but acted like a stranger. She watched him return to the store, saw Jack Wheeler clap him on the shoulder with what looked like approval. Miss Sullivan? A small voice pulled her attention back to the classroom. Emma, one of her third graders, held up a painting. Is this right? Rachel turned from the window, from the sight of her husband playing small-town hardware clerk. It's beautiful, Emma. Tell me about the colors you chose. Later, in Sarah's guest house, Rachel finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind all day. How many people in town know who he really is? Sarah didn't pretend not to understand. Just Jack as far as I know. And me? She paused. He's different here, Rachel. You saw that yourself. He's pretending, Rachel said, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. Maybe. Sarah's voice was gentle. Or maybe, like the rest of us, he came here running from something. Even if that something was himself. That night, Rachel added a new sketch to her growing collection. Marcus, no Mark as he was known here, carrying lumber, helping customers, learning the very human skills his billions had never required. Next to it, she drew the Manhattan skyline they'd left behind, all sharp edges and cold glass. She didn't tear up the sketch of Marcus as she might have done weeks ago. Instead, she tucked it into her growing portfolio, next to the ultrasound picture from Dr. Chen's office. Two versions of a future, both taking shape in this small Montana town that collected broken people and helped them rebuild themselves one day at a time. Outside her window, the evening light painted Pine Valley in soft purples and golds, and somewhere in that gentle darkness, a man who'd once ruled an empire was learning the value of an honest day's work. Rachel touched her belly again, feeling the flutter of movement that had just started this week. Well, little one, she whispered, it seems we're not the only ones starting over. You're holding it wrong, Marcus said, watching Amy Wheeler struggle with the roofing hammer. They stood on her garage roof, surrounded by bundles of shingles in the crisp Montana morning. Well, Mr. Boston, show me how it's done, Amy challenged, her father's directness evident in her tone. Marcus hesitated. 2 weeks ago he wouldn't have known which end of a hammer to hold. But now. Like this, he demonstrated, positioning his hand lower on the grip. You want control, not power. Let the weight of the head do the work. The nail sank perfectly into the shingle. Amy raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. Not bad for a city boy. Your father's a good teacher, Marcus admitted, remembering his own blistered hands from those first days. They worked in companionable silence, the rhythm of hammering punctuated by Amy's occasional questions about proper technique. Below, Jack watched them while pretending to organize his truck's toolbox. You know, Amy said casually, Dad told me who you really are. Marcus nearly missed the nail. He did? Marcus Sterling, billionaire businessman playing hardware store clerk in Montana. She lined up another shingle. Question is, why? He thought about the question as they worked. The sun climbed higher, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed noon. "I thought I knew everything worth knowing," he finally said. "ROI, market leverage, hostile takeovers. But I couldn't fix a leaky faucet or help an old lady find the right light bulb." He gestured at the half-finished roof. "I couldn't do this. And now? Now I'm learning that some things can't be delegated or bought. They have to be earned nail by nail." Amy nodded, satisfied. "Good answer. Now come on, you're invited to Sunday potluck." The community center buzzed with activity. Tables groaned under the weight of casseroles, pies, and dishes Marcus couldn't name. He stood awkwardly with his store-bought pasta salad, feeling like an imposter. "Mark. Over here." Mrs. Henderson waved from a table. The same Mrs. Henderson whose toilet he'd finally fixed yesterday, after 3 attempts and a crash course in plumbing from Jack. Soon he found himself surrounded by the people he'd been serving at the store. Mr. Peterson shared stories about the town's history. Dr. Chen's daughter showed him her science project. The local kids played tag around the tables, occasionally using him as a human shield. "Try this." Sarah Martinez appeared, sliding a plate of something homemade in front of him. Family recipe. The flavors exploded on his tongue, nothing like the carefully curated meals of Boston's finest restaurants. This food had history, had heart. Like everything else in Pine Valley, it carried the weight of genuine connection. "Good?" Sarah asked, knowing the answer. "I've never..." He started, then corrected himself. "It's perfect." Later that week, a boy no more than 12 wandered into the hardware store, clutching a handful of crumpled bills. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, using what Jack called his real person voice instead of his corporate tone. "My mom's birthday's coming up," the boy said. "Wanted to build her a birdhouse, but..." He trailed off, looking at the tools with obvious confusion. Marcus remembered being that age when his own father had dismissed such sentimental projects as wasteful. "Tell you what," he heard himself saying, "let me show you how." He gathered the materials, then cleared a space at the store's workbench. "First rule of building anything," he said, picking up a hammer, "is knowing your tools." As he demonstrated the proper grip, the safe way to start a nail, the importance of measuring twice, he felt eyes on him. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of Rachel hurrying past, one hand resting on her now visible pregnancy. His heart clenched, but he kept his attention on the boy. "See? You want to let the hammer do the work," he explained, the same words Jack had used with him. "It's not about force, it's about patience and attention." The boy's face lit up as the pieces came together under his guidance. An hour later, a slightly crooked but sturdy birdhouse sat on the workbench. "It's not perfect," the boy said doubtfully. "Perfect is overrated," Marcus replied, surprising himself. "This has character. Your mom will love it because you made it yourself." After the boy left, proudly carrying his creation, Jack emerged from the back room. "Not bad, boss man. Not bad at all." "I'm not." Marcus started to protest the title, then saw Jack's knowing smile. "I'm learning," he said instead. "Yes," Jack agreed, "you are." That evening, Marcus sat on his hotel room bed, looking at his hands. The blisters had calloused over, and there was a new cut from teaching the boy about saw safety. In Boston, these hands had signed contracts worth millions. Here in Pine Valley, they were learning to build things that mattered. He thought of Rachel watching through the window, of the child growing inside her. For the first time, he didn't think about what he'd lost or what he needed to reclaim. Instead, he thought about what he was becoming, one lesson at a time. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in colors no corner office could capture. Somewhere in this small town, a boy was giving his mother an early peek at her birthday present, and a birdhouse made with care would soon welcome morning songs. Marcus Sterling, who had once measured success in dollars and cents, found himself counting different things now. Smiles earned, tasks completed, trust built nail by nail, day by day. The first snowflakes fell just before dawn, fat and heavy against Wheeler Hardware's front window. Marcus watched them while stocking emergency supplies. Flashlights, batteries, camp stoves, anything that might help during what the weather service was calling the storm of the decade. "Mark?" Jack's voice carried from the back. "Need help with these generators?" The store had been chaos since yesterday's forecast. Marcus had watched in amazement as the community mobilized with practiced efficiency. No panic buying or hoarding, just neighbors checking on neighbors, sharing lists, making sure everyone had what they needed. "Mrs. Chin needs her generator checked," Jack said, wiping his hands on his work pants. "Her clinic can't lose power. Think you can handle it?" 7 months ago, Marcus would have delegated such a task to maintenance staff. Now he grabbed his tools without hesitation. I'll head over now before the roads get worse. The wind had picked up by the time he reached the clinic, carrying stinging pellets of ice. Dr. Chin met him at the service entrance, her usual calm demeanor tinged with worry. "Thank goodness," she said, leading him to the generator. "We have 3 women near term, including Rachel." Marcus's hands stilled on the generator's housing. "Rachel? Is she?" "Routine checkup yesterday. Everything's fine, but with this storm coming..." She paused. "She's doing well, you know. Teaching art at the school has given her purpose." He nodded, focusing on the task at hand. The generator needed minor repairs, nothing complex but crucial for the hours ahead. As he worked, Dr. Chin told him about the clinic's emergency protocols, the backup systems, the community storm procedures. "We look after our own here," she said simply. At Pine Valley Elementary, Rachel waddled through empty halls, checking her art room one last time. School had been canceled ahead of the storm, but she needed to secure the supplies, protect the children's projects from any potential roof leaks. Her daughter, they'd learned the gender last month, kicked vigorously as she moved around the room. "I know, little one," she murmured. "We'll head home soon." Through the window she could see Pine Valley transforming. The mountains had vanished behind curtains of white, and the wind drove snow in horizontal sheets. Main Street was almost deserted, except for a few figures hurrying between buildings. A familiar form caught her eye, Marcus leaving the clinic with his tool bag. Even from here she could see how differently he moved now, with purpose rather than entitlement. He stopped to help someone struggling with supplies, and Rachel felt something shift in her chest. The lights flickered. "Generator count?" Jack asked as Marcus returned, stamping snow from his boots. "Clinic's good. Delivered the portable ones to the senior center and Mrs. Henderson." He checked his list. "Still need to get one to the school." The radio crackled. "This is an emergency weather update. The winter storm warning has been upgraded to a blizzard warning. Conditions are deteriorating rapidly. All residents are advised to seek shelter immediately." Jack's phone rang. "Sarah?" "Yeah, we're hearing it too." His face darkened. "When did you last hear from her?" Marcus watched Jack's expression shift from concern to alarm. "Rachel's still at the school? Alone?" The lights flickered again, longer this time. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. "The roads to the school," Marcus said, his voice tight. "How long before they're impassable?" "Already are for most vehicles." Jack studied him. "But the store's 4-wheel drive might make it." The entire town went dark. In the sudden silence, Marcus could hear his heart pounding. Somewhere in that whiteout was Rachel, alone and 7 months pregnant. The old Marcus would have called emergency services, delegated the problem. "Keys," he said, holding out his hand to Jack. "And the emergency kit." Jack tossed him both. "You sure you can handle that truck in these conditions?" Marcus thought of the past months, of all he'd learned about real work, real responsibility. "I have to try." "Not alone, you don't." Jack grabbed his coat. "Rule 1 of Pine Valley storms. We work in pairs." As they prepared to head out, Marcus caught his reflection in the darkened store window. He barely recognized himself. Work clothes, rough hands, determination instead of arrogance in his eyes. The storm raged outside, and somewhere in that chaos was everything that mattered. The hardware store's heavy door swung open, letting in a blast of snow and ice. In the distance, emergency sirens began to wail. "Ready?" Jack asked. Marcus thought of Rachel in the dark school, of their unborn daughter, of all the things he'd finally learned to value. "Ready?" They stepped into the storm together, 2 figures quickly swallowed by the swirling white, while behind them, Pine Valley settled into the darkness of a long night ahead. The truck's headlights carved weak paths through the whiteout, barely illuminating 10 feet ahead. Marcus gripped the wheel, every lesson Jack had given him about winter driving running through his mind. "Easy on the gas," Jack reminded him, scanning the white void ahead. "Let the weight of the truck do the work." Just like using a hammer, Marcus thought. Not about force, about control. The truck slid slightly and he corrected without panicking, feeling the vehicle respond to his steady hands. Their radio crackled. "Jack, you copy?" Sarah's voice fought through static. "Here. Any word from Rachel?" "Her cell's dead, but Amy got through to the school's landline before the lines went down. She's in the art room, 2nd floor. Says she's fine, but what?" Marcus's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "She's having contractions. Might be Braxton Hicks, might be..." The radio dissolved into static. Marcus pressed the gas slightly and Jack didn't correct him. They weren't alone in their rescue effort. Through the swirling snow, They caught glimpses of other vehicles: Bill's ancient pickup, the volunteer fire department's SUV, Dr. Chen's four-wheel drive. Pine Valley moved as one, each person playing their part in a well-rehearsed dance. A massive shape loomed suddenly through the white, a fallen tree blocking half the road. Hold on. Marcus turned the wheel, drawing on every minute of practice he'd had maneuvering deliveries in the hardware store's lot. The truck fishtailed, then straightened, threading the narrow gap between tree and ditch. Jack let out a breath. Not bad, city boy. They were halfway to the school when the truck's engine coughed. Marcus recognized the sound from his lessons in the store's workshop. Ice in the fuel line. We have to stop, Jack said. Clear the line or we'll stall. There's no time. 10 minutes now or 2 hours stuck in a ditch. Jack's tone brooked no argument. Your choice. Marcus swallowed his frustration, remembering earlier lessons about patience and doing things right. They pulled over and he popped the hood, the wind nearly ripping it from his hands. Hold this. Jack handed him a flashlight, then bent over the engine. Together they worked in practice synchronization. Marcus no longer needed every step explained. He anticipated Jack's needs, handed him tools before he asked, kept the light steady despite the buffeting wind. Back on the road, they caught up to Bill's pickup, stuck at the bottom of the hill leading to the school. 3 men pushed while Bill gunned the engine, but the wheels just spun. Without discussion, Marcus and Jack jumped out to help. The snow stung their faces as they pushed, 5 men working as one. Marcus felt his designer boots slip, but someone, he couldn't see who, caught his arm, steadied him. They pushed again and the pickup lurched forward, making it up the hill. The school finally emerged from the wideout, its dark windows like empty eyes. The parking lot had become a staging area. Vehicles arranged to block the wind, people stringing guide ropes between buildings, emergency lanterns casting islands of light in the darkness. Dr. Chin hurried over as they parked. She's definitely in labor. Amy's with her, but we need to get her to the clinic. Marcus was already moving, medical kit in one hand, rope in the other. He'd memorized the school's layout from delivering supplies to Rachel's art room. The wind nearly knocked him down as he crossed to the building. Other figures joined him: Bill, the fire chief, Sarah wrapped in a parka. They moved together, a chain of bodies fighting through the storm. Inside, emergency lights cast a weak glow. Their footsteps echoed in the empty halls as they climbed to the second floor. Marcus led the way, no longer the outsider but part of this chain of community, each person essential. Rachel's voice carried from the art room, a muffled cry of pain. He burst through the door to find her on her knees, Amy supporting her. Scattered art supplies surrounded them, and against one wall, the children's paintings stirred in the draft from a window that wouldn't quite close. Marcus. Rachel's eyes found his, wide with pain and surprise. I'm here. He knelt beside her, taking her hand. We're all here. Another contraction hit. Dr. Chin checked her quickly, face grave. Too fast. We need to move her now. The truck's blocked in, Jack said from the doorway. Bill's is the only one with a clear path. Rachel squeezed Marcus's hand so hard he felt bones grind. I can't walk that far. Marcus looked around the art room, seeing it through new eyes. Not just art supplies now, but resources, materials, solutions. The art cart, he said. Flat top, sturdy wheels. We can use it as a gurney, the fire chief finished. Good thinking. They moved fast then, Marcus and Amy clearing the cart while others gathered blankets. Each person knew their role, no orders needed, no corporate hierarchy, just people working together to protect their own. As they lifted Rachel onto the cart, she grabbed Marcus's sleeve. The baby, it's too early. Hey, he said softly, finding calm he didn't know he had. Remember what Jack taught me? Some things aren't about force. They're about trust, about letting others help, about... She cried out again, cutting him off. The cart was ready, the route cleared, the chain of people prepared to guide them through the storm. Marcus took his place at Rachel's head, one hand on the cart, the other holding hers. Ready? She looked up at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. When did you become this person? When I learned what actually matters, he said. Now let's get you both home safe. They moved into the storm together, a community united against the darkness, while behind them children's paintings danced in the wind, bright splashes of hope against the gathering night. Bill's pickup crawled through the storm, chains rattling against packed snow. In the back seat, Rachel lay across Marcus's lap, each contraction drawing a muffled cry against his shoulder. Dr. Chin monitored them from the other side, medical bag ready. Talk to me, Rachel gasped between contractions. Distract me. Marcus stroked her hair, remembering their first date. How confident he'd been, how certain that everything in life could be acquired through the right combination of money and power. "Remember that ridiculous French restaurant?" he said. "Where I ordered everything in terrible French?" A weak laugh. The waiter's face. "And you ordered in perfect French, making me look like an idiot?" He smiled at the memory. "That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were stronger than me. Better than me. I just forgot it somewhere along the way." The truck slid sideways and Bill wrestled with the wheel. Through the windshield, Marcus could barely make out the red taillights of the fire department SUV leading them through the wideout. 7 minutes apart, Dr. Chin announced, checking her watch. "We need to hurry." Bill nodded grimly. "Doing my best, document roads disappearing fast." Marcus felt the unique helplessness of having to trust others completely. No amount of money or power could clear this path. Only the local knowledge of a man he'd once looked down on, only the skills of a doctor who'd chosen Pine Valley over prestige. Rachel's next contraction was harder. She grabbed Marcus's hand and he saw fear in her eyes. "The baby," she whispered. "Marcus, if something happens." "Nothing will happen." He surprised himself with his certainty. "You know why? Because we've got the best doctor in Montana. Because we've got an entire town fighting to get us through this storm. Because some things are stronger than fear." Dr. Chen caught his eye in the darkness, approval flickering across her face. The pickup slowed almost to a stop. Through the swirling snow, Marcus could just make out the shapes of people with lights, forming a human chain to guide them into the clinic's emergency entrance. "Almost there," Bill called back. "Hang on." Rachel's water broke as they carried her into the clinic. The backup generators hummed, creating islands of light and warmth in the storm-dark building. Sarah and Amy had everything ready, operating room prepped, equipment sterilized, emergency supplies laid out. "BP's dropping," Dr. Chin announced. "We need to do the C-section now." Marcus felt Rachel's grip tighten. "Don't leave," she whispered. "Never again," he promised. The next hour passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Marcus watched in awe as Dr. Chin directed her team with calm precision. This wasn't the sterile efficiency of a big city hospital. It was intimate, personal, every person in the room connected by more than just professional duty. When the power flickered, Jack's voice came from the hallway. "Generators holding steady, document. We've got you covered." When Rachel's blood pressure dipped dangerously low, Sarah appeared with exactly what was needed before anyone asked. When Marcus's legs threatened to give out, Bill silently appeared with a stool, supporting him without comment. And then, cutting through the storm's howl and the generator's hum, came a new sound, their daughter's first cry. "She's early but strong," Dr. Chin announced, holding up a tiny, perfect being. "Just like her mother." Marcus stared at his daughter, this miracle born in a storm. She had Rachel's nose, his dark hair, and a fierce grip that latched onto his finger when he reached for her. "Catherine," Rachel whispered, the name they'd chosen months ago. Catherine Rose. "After your grandmother," Marcus remembered. The indomitable woman who'd raised Rachel with the strength he was only now beginning to understand. As Dr. Chin finished the surgery, Marcus held their daughter close, marveling at how something so small could feel so monumentally important. All his life he pursued bigger things, bigger deals, bigger buildings, bigger power. Now, cradling 7 pounds of new life, he finally understood true magnitude. Rachel watched them through tired eyes. "You're different," she said softly. "I had good teachers." He looked around the room at the people who'd shown him what real strength looked like. "Rachel, I know I don't deserve." "Shh." She reached for him, for their daughter. "Just hold us." Outside, the storm raged on, but in this room, surrounded by the community that had become his teachers, his friends, his real family, Marcus Sterling held his world in his arms and finally, completely, understood what it meant to be rich. Catherine Rose Sterling, born in a blizzard, welcomed by an entire town, opened her eyes to a father who had learned to build things, to fix things, to see the value in small moments and honest work. She would never know the man he'd been in Boston. She would only know this version, the one Pine Valley had helped him become. "Welcome home, little one," Rachel whispered, and Marcus knew she was talking to both of them. Spring came to Pine Valley in gentle waves of green, melting away the last memories of the historic blizzard. On the outskirts of town, where meadow met forest, a house was taking shape, not through corporate contractors or hired crews, but by the hands of the community itself. Marcus stood on the half-finished porch, reviewing the plans spread across a sawdust-covered table. 3 months of Catherine's midnight cries and Rachel's cautious smiles had changed him more than 3 decades in Boston's boardrooms. "Foundations solid," Jack said, coming up beside him. Good thing you learned about proper supports? Marcus smiled, remembering those first lessons in the hardware store. Good thing I had the right teacher. The sound of hammers and saws filled the morning air as townspeople arrived for the barn raising. Bill's truck pulled up, loaded with lumber. Sarah's van followed, packed with food for the workers. Dr. Chen's daughter ran past with Catherine in her arms, both giggling in the spring sunshine. Still can't believe you sold the company, Jack commented, watching the activity. Marcus thought about the headlines. Sterling Industries sold an employee buyout. His corporate board had called it madness, but watching his former employees become owners had felt more satisfying than any hostile takeover. Turns out there are better things to build than empires, he said. Rachel appeared from inside, safety glasses pushed up on her head, sawdust in her hair. She'd been painting the nursery, not in the pale pastels of their Boston plans, but in vibrant murals that told stories of community and connection. The Hendersons are here with the windows, she announced. And Amy's brought the handmade quilts for Catherine's room. Their eyes met, and Marcus saw what he'd been missing in all their years in Boston. Real partnership, built on shared work and genuine understanding. They were learning each other again, not through expensive dates and social events, but through midnight feedings and paint-stained fingers and the daily work of building a life together. Marcus, Bill called from below. Need your expertise on these support beams? He headed down, hearing Rachel's quiet laugh behind him. Time was when being needed meant emergency board meetings and international conference calls. Now it meant helping neighbors, fixing things, teaching what he'd learned. The barn raising moved with the organized chaos he'd come to appreciate in Pine Valley. Everyone knew their role, each person's skills contributing to the whole. Marcus worked alongside people who had once been strangers, now comfortable enough to tease him about his former life. Remember when you couldn't tell a Phillips head from a flathead? Amy joked as they installed windows. Remember when you thought manual labor was beneath you? Sarah added, passing up supplies. But there was no malice in their words, only the warm inclusion of people who had watched him grow, who had helped him become someone new. As the sun reached its peak, Sarah called everyone to lunch. They gathered on blankets spread across the spring grass, passing dishes and sharing stories. Catherine was passed from arm to arm, cherished by a dozen honorary aunts and uncles. Speech, someone called out as they finished eating. Come on, Marcus, give us a proper dedication. He stood, looking at the faces turned toward him. Faces that had gone from strangers to teachers to family. Rachel came to stand beside him, Catherine sleeping against her shoulder. In Boston, he began, I built skyscrapers. Steel and glass monuments to power and wealth. But this, he gestured to the half-finished house, to the people gathered around it. This is the first real home I've ever built. He looked at Rachel, saw tears matching his own. Someone very wise once told me that everything has a purpose, but it's useless without the right heart behind it. I thought she was talking about tools. He smiled at Jack. Turns out she was talking about me. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they returned to work. Marcus moved between groups, no longer the billionaire playing at manual labor, but a man who had earned his place in this community. He helped raise walls that would shelter his family, installed windows that would welcome Montana sunrises, built a porch where neighbors would gather for years to come. As evening approached, they stepped back to admire their work. The house wasn't finished, but its bones were strong, its heart already full of love and laughter and the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. Rachel slipped her hand into his, Catherine sleeping peacefully in her other arm. Ready to go home? She asked. Marcus looked at their half-built house, at the tired but happy faces of their neighbors, at the life they were building together. In Boston, he'd owned penthouses and summer homes, but he'd never understood until now what home really meant. I am home, he said softly. Finally, I'm home. The spring breeze carried the scent of new growth, of possibilities, of beginnings. In Pine Valley, Montana, where a hardware store had taught him humility and a blizzard had taught him trust, Marcus Sterling had found something his billions could never buy, a place where he belonged just as he was. Not because of what he owned, but because of who he'd become, nail by nail, day by day, lesson by lesson, love by love. What would you have done in Rachel's position when she discovered Marcus in Pine Valley? Would you have confronted him immediately, or like Rachel, would you have waited to see if his transformation was genuine? Think about what true change looks like. Can someone really transform through hard work and community connection? Consider Marcus's choice to give up his corporate empire for a simpler life in Montana. Was it worth trading billions of dollars for genuine connections and a chance at real family happiness? What does this tell us about the true meaning of wealth? Many of us face crossroads where we must choose between success and authenticity. Have you ever had to make a similar choice between what society values and what your heart knows is right? If this story of transformation and redemption touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. We believe that everyone deserves a second chance, and stories like this remind us that it's never too late to change. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our new stories of hope, redemption, and the power of community. Your support helps us continue sharing these meaningful narratives that remind us what truly matters in life.